Thank you, Dean Friedman. Thank you, David Blankenhorn, for being here tonight. Thank you all for being here tonight. Excuse me, I'm fighting a bit of a cold, so please forgive me. As you've just heard now, David Blankenhorn and I actually do agree on a number of things, and then there are some things we don't agree on, which we'll address tonight. But one of the things we do actually agree on is that marriage matters, that the freedom to marry, the institution of marriage, taking marriage seriously is important. In fact, the book that David has now told you, I think very wisely, you should all buy and read, my book, is called Why Marriage Matters. So this is in fact something we have in common. We do think that this is important, and obviously you think it's important, and our country sees this as important, something worth talking about, something worth taking seriously. Another thing I think that we do take seriously and agree on is that in the United States, we are committed to respecting people. We're committed to respecting choice. We're committed to respecting liberty. We're committed to respecting the pursuit of happiness, the proper boundaries between the government and people. We're committed to valuing families and strengthening couples and their children. I think we're also able to agree on the fact that children are important. I spent the morning, actually, with my little nephew in his grade school. I got to be the relative of the day who went to see him. So we all care about the children in our lives and take their well-being very seriously. The American Academy of Pediatrics also takes the well-being of children seriously. This is the professional organization of our nation's kids' doctors. And last year, not even a year ago, they issued a report entitled The Effects of Marriage, Civil Union, and Domestic Partnership Laws on the Health and Well-Being of Children. And let me read you a tiny bit of what they had to say. Our nation's kids' doctors told us this, quote, "There is ample evidence to show that children raised by same-gender parents fare as well as those raised by heterosexual parents. More than 25 years of research have documented that there is no relationship between parents' sexual orientation and any measure of a child's emotional, psychosocial, and behavioral adjustment. These data have demonstrated no risk to children as a result of growing up in a family with one or more gay parents. Conscientious and nurturing adults, whether they are men or women, heterosexual or homosexual, can be excellent parents. The rights, benefits, and protections of civil marriage can further strengthen these families." Now, I quote from the American Academy of Pediatrics rather than say my book, because I am not a scientist. David Blankenhorn is not a scientist. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a teacher. I'm not a child welfare expert. I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not a psychoanalyst. And neither is David Blankenhorn. So when you consider one of the points on which we do differ, the well-being of children and how it relates to this debate, I don't think you should have to take my word for it, and I don't think you should take David Blankenhorn's word for it. I do think you should take what the American Academy of Pediatrics has to say, or the American Psychological Association, or the American Psychiatric Association, or the American Psychoanalytic Association, or the Child Welfare League of America, or the National Education Association, or the National Association of Social Workers, and in fact, every single mainstream, reputable, professional agency composed of hundreds and thousands, indeed, if you add them up, millions of professionals across many fields, all of whom addressing and dedicating their lives to the well-being of our children, all of whom have said precisely what I've just read for you, not from my words, but from the words of the American Academy of Pediatrics. Don't take an advocate's word for it. Take the word of what the people who've looked at this without an axe to grind have had to say. In the most recent issue of the Family Law Quarterly, just came out, it's dated fall 2006, it just came out, appears a massive survey article. This is the American Bar Association Family Law Section's journal. So it's the lawyers who deal with custody disputes and visitation and parenting rights and the well-being of children and advocating for children and families, published this piece by Professor Michael Wald of Stanford, surveying again the vast literature on this question. Don't take my word for it. Here are 3 things that this published, reviewed journal had to say. Quote, "The claim that there is such a thing as a single optimal home for rearing children is flawed from a scientific perspective. As a number of leading researchers on families have concluded, quote, social science research does not and cannot support the contention that the presence of 2 biological or opposite-sex parents comprises a, quote, optimal child-rearing environment." The journal goes on. "While there is some evidence that living with 2 biological parents may be preferable to living with a single parent, and that divorce can be harmful to children's development, none of the family structure studies, listen, none of the family structure studies provide any support for the claim that the gender of the 2 parents makes a difference." And one more little quote, again from the experts, not the advocates. Quote, "There is no evidence that children in general do better with a father and mother than with 2 mothers or 2 fathers." Now, I provide that data and that information in other people's words so that it cannot just be reduced to he says, this side says, that side says. The body of experts, and I mean across the board unanimously, have said again and again what I've just read to you, and you don't have to take my word for it. Go check it out. They're on the websites, Family Law Quarterly, American Academy of Pediatrics. But I want to also make a further point, and that is, let's suppose that were not true. Let's suppose for a moment that there were indeed countervailing evidence or some suggestion or even anything for David Blankenhorn and others to point to that would suggest that, you know what, it may even be true that in general or often there is one kind of optimal family, and it's not gay couples or single parents or divorced parents or blended families. Let's just suppose for a moment that all these other experts are wrong and David Blankenhorn is right. The further point is, how does keeping gay couples who are building a life together, many of whom are raising children, out of the institution of marriage, help anyone else? It's not as if, and we know this now for a fact by looking at Canada or Massachusetts, where gay couples are able to marry, it's not as if the gay couples are going to use up all the marriage licenses, and then there won't be any marriage left for those other optimal families. There is enough marriage to share. And it's not as if letting the gay couples in with their kids or without is somehow going to so tarnish the club that couples like David Blankenhorn and his wife are going to leave the institution. So even if it were true, which it is not, that there were one kind of optimal family, punishing those who are in the less optimal families does nothing to help the others, but instead harms the children being raised by the parents that they have, and harms the couples who may not fit somebody else's definition of what is optimal. And that is deeply wrong. Excluding committed same-sex couples and their children from the institution of marriage helps no one and harms families.